We always, 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 always have the opportunity to decide how our stories end. We might not be able to choose the beginning. The middle might be a tougher road as we figure out why things happened and figure out who we want to be in light of them. But the ending is always up to us. Good afternoon and welcome to yet another episode of Ari's Overshares, the series in which I, your host Ari, overshare on all matters of the heart, matters of the mind, and generally matters of my life. I said that for the first time as an intro last week and I love it, so we're gonna kind of roll with it. I have been working slowly, tenderly, and as much as I feel comfortable and safe to do so, working on building a relationship with my father. And I hate to start these by saying, I'm in a unique circumstance, because I feel like when it comes to matters of the family, even though we might all share some similarities, I also do feel like every circumstance is supremely unique to the individual. But it is kind of weird or rare or awkward or all of the above, because my father is not somebody who's ever been physically absent chronically in my life. And my father's been sort of vacant in the role of performing as a father, but he's not been absent in the case of, like, we grew up in the same house and he's always been around in some capacity. It's not like my parents divorced and I never saw him or he ran away. My father works a very challenging and demanding profession. He works in the medical field, and I just never really had a relationship with him growing up because he wasn't around. He was always at the hospital or at the office, and outside of that, more important family matters that I don't think I'm ready or comfortable sharing the specific details of right now. Maybe in the future I will be. Actually, in the future I'll absolutely have to be. But my father was someone who, A, really wasn't ever really around based on the circumstances that I just described, but B, also was a source of a lot of familial strife in my household growing up, and so he wasn't really somebody that I ever thought it to be smart or wise to try to develop a relationship with. But all of that's sort of changing now. I've been really reflecting on my mortality and the realization that everybody that I know in my life today isn't going to necessarily be around for the entirety of my lifetime. My grandparents are getting older, my parents are getting older, and so there's just been this general, deeper than normal sense of wanting to appreciate and hold gratitude and acknowledgement for that reality. So I've been getting to know my father, I think, really because it's starting to dawn on me that I'm not going to have him for the rest of my life. Probably not going to have him for the rest of my life, and I want to know him in a way that I never did. Now, before I get into the expansion of my relationship with him, I'll start by explaining sort of how this all started to come about. So a few weeks ago for Father's Day, I wrote him a letter, and it was I was laughing with my friend because she was like, that's not a light letter. But to me, it was pretty surface level for how deep I go, or I basically was like, hey, look, I'm just thinking about these things really deeply, and I never really knew you, and I want to know you better, and just thank you for all of the things that you've done in my life that I probably never have really thanked you for before. And I listed a few of them out, and I told him in that letter, this is not a forgiveness for the things that you've done that might have hurt other people in the past, including me, but you've had a tremendous impact on my life, and I don't want you to feel like you're not worthy of or deserving of the right to claim a relationship with me, and I want to know you better. So I love you, thank you for everything, and just consider this an open invitation to come closer to me if that's something that you so desire. And he appreciated it, and we started to kind of just lightly text and communicate in a way that we never have before. I never used to be in this sort of casual relationship with my dad. I never really even viewed him so much of a dad as a father, like, somebody that's kind of on this hill that I don't often get to climb and don't get to see. And he's been coming down from that, and I've been trying to meet him halfway as often as I can to encourage him and to reinforce that I meant what I said in that letter. And it's been a really beautiful transgression, a beautiful evolution of the perception that I had of him my whole life and what it's turning into slowly. And I hope that it will continue, but if that's not in the cards, then I'm just at least appreciative of what we've been able to develop and build so far now. So I wrote down a couple examples of conversations that we had that mattered a lot to me a couple weeks ago when I did actually I didn't talk about it on this channel, but I did another motorcycle track day. And I stayed at my parents' house the night before because it was on the way up to the motorcycle track. And after dinner, he was like, I think I kind of want Dairy Queen. We settled on froyo because I'm not a big sugar girl. He's not a big sugar guy either. Anyway, I digress. We ended up hanging out. We went in the car together and we drove to a froyo place that I found on Google, and it was kind of awkward. It's just weird, I guess, still to feel like I'm having bonding time with my dad. I guess maybe if you've always had a relationship with one of your parents or both of your parents or some family member that you feel like you're really close to, you don't really feel like you're doing anything special. It's kind of like hanging out with a friend. This is different. I feel like I'm bonding with somebody for the first time. I actually wrote down here that physically and emotionally in my body, it's felt almost like I'm being adopted. Like there's a bond that's forming. There's clearly some kind of a connection. It's definitely somewhat emotional, but there's gaps, and it doesn't feel just instinctual, like you can lean in, like it's nothing. It feels not interviewee, but like you're still kind of feeling out, I've got me, but can you support me if I need you to? That kind of thing. I'm speaking on my behalf. I'm not speaking on his behalf. I have no idea what it's felt like for him. It's been kind of interesting. It's been a lot of fumbling and a lot of awkward moments, but beautifully awkward moments, like being in the car with him on that drive and talking about how I don't really eat sugar, which he didn't really know, and explaining why I don't really eat sugar and what this track day is all about, and sort of offering information I recognize consciously in this way where I want to be accepted. I hope to please the version of me, that he might have in his head about who I am as somebody who doesn't know me that well. And so I view all of these opportunities as kind of places to put feelers out there, but not being too hurt or letting myself get hurt if he were to deny a part of me that I know is important to me. And so that's what I mean by it kind of feels like, being adopted or like a foster parent in a way. But in a really good way. Like, I've been very excited about it. Anyway, so we get to the froyo spot, and this is really where the excitement, like there's just like this bursting inner child excitement comes right out of me, because we get out of the car and we're walking to the froyo spot, and we walk in, and before we even walk in, actually, there's a young girl, probably a few years younger than me, and she's walking in with her mom a few steps in front of us, and I just had this joyous feeling in my stomach that I really do kind of equate to kind of like my inner child jumping up and down, being like, yeah, see that? That's a girl with her mom. Like, I'm here with my dad. Like, my dad's here. I have a dad. And I was just so excited about that. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be excited about that. We walk in, and there was another young kid, probably in high school, with his father. And then there was another older Asian woman with 2 or 3, either her kids or older grandkids. And to walk into an establishment and for the first time be like, my dad's here too. I've got one. I've got one, It's really hard for me to overblow the significance of that to me. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, it really does move me to tears to feel like I can say that, or I've been able to start saying that, because I never did. And not that was like a conscious void, but it was definitely an unconscious void, going to froyo places to pick up stuff alone or with my friends, I'd always unconsciously be picking up on, because of the trauma and the hypervigilance, who's here, who are they with. And so unconsciously, energetically, I'd always feel that void. I just never really consciously was like, oh, everyone's here with their parents and I'm not. But in the presence of my own dad, I felt that joy, that I fit in this beautiful way that I never had when I was growing up. And we walked to the froyo counter and I'm explaining to him like the different cups and how the handle works, and we're looking at all the flavors and it just felt really, really good. Unfortunately, that's not the only time. Last week, I chose to text him and be like, hey, I'm coming home. I have to drop a few things off. Like, will you be there? And he's like, yeah, I'll be there. Like, I'd love to see you. Let's hang out. And I told him I was going to pick up a cigar on my way home. And I asked him if he wanted one. And long story short, after I finished everything that I needed to finish up at home, I lit my cigar and him and I sat outside on the deck. And I asked him about his like journey to medical school, because again, it's been actually kind of, embarrassed is way too light of a word. Humiliated is not the right word either. I'm struggling to discern whether shame is too intense of a word or not, but it's probably the closest of that bucket of words in that category to allot this feeling to. But people just casually over the course of my life would ask me basic questions about my dad, like when was he born, which I truly actually in this present moment don't know what year he was born or his age. I know roughly how old he is. I actually don't even remember his birth date. Sorry. But he's forgotten mine too, so it all works out. Just basic stuff about him, like I could never answer when people would ask. Every time that something like that has happened over the course of my life, where someone has asked me a question and I don't know the answer, I do feel shame. And it would always kind of create this low level just void in me, in my brain and in my body, where I'd be like, damn, like I really don't know that. Like, I wish I knew that. Like, I should know that. Part of the challenge with having a relationship with my father in the past, I don't think either one of us were really ready to explore that. But he was always so aggressive, and he would sometimes try to give advice, and it would feel really scary to me as a younger kid, because he'd get really serious about the way that he would present certain ideas or the way that he'd present certain concerns. And I needed to evolve and engender a personal internal feeling of safety before I could walk into that and not feel like my safety was being threatened. I think enough time has also lapsed on his end where he's realized that that hasn't really worked in the past, neither for me nor for my brother, where we both kind of just reeled back and pulled away. And I've had this really wonderful, opportunity to ask him these questions in a way where I have the power and I sort of have the leverage, and he's checking himself and tempering some of that volatility and that aggression. It feels like I'm sort of setting the dance, and it doesn't feel like it's out of control. And in the past, it always felt that way. And that definitely helps a lot, because I get to kind of choose now, and that makes it so that we're not really going too fast, or we're not going in a direction that I don't want to go. So I sat with him and he explained to me, his whole path for why he went to medical school where he did, and his different paths to residency, which I had no idea about. And I asked him some questions about why he chose certain routes, and I was trying to get a view of who my father was when he was growing up, long before he was a dad or even a husband. It truly was so nourishing to me. It was such a nourishing conversation, and I have actually struggled to put into articulate words the way that it felt. Nourishment is the closest word that I can come to. It made me feel so satisfied. I was so satiated emotionally, nervous system wise. I was calm. I felt like it felt kind of like putting aloe vera over a sunburn, like the skin cells were just taking in what they got, just fully kind of soaking up, almost like a sponge. And I went home that night and I felt so good. I felt just so nourished. There's not another word that comes remotely close to that word. I just felt nourished in my body and deep in my soul that I was able to learn this about him. And I opened up about some things. I shared some honest truths about myself that definitely put me in a vulnerable position, like telling him that I think deep down I really do want to be a writer. And I checked that a little bit because I wasn't sure how that was going to sit with him. But he was so supportive of that too. I didn't think it was going to sit well. I really didn't. But he said some really supportive things after that I don't really want to share right now. But it was just such an automatic, like he processed it, he listened to me, and he said something that was actually really genuinely supportive. And that meant so much to me. It meant so much to me to get that from him. And these are the things, like, when you've had wounds like this your whole life and voids like this your whole life, you just kind of get good at putting a traffic cone over them and being like, don't step on that. Don't look at that too hard. Don't go near that. You don't know if the ground's steady around it. To sort of like acknowledge it in this tender way has been priceless. And I'm almost speechless. I almost don't even have the words. I'm so glad that I had that conversation, and I'm going to remember that conversation. And that I had that conversation and that I know these things about my dad. It kind of created that same joy in me, like walking into the froyo shop and seeing other kids with their parents made me feel. I was like, yeah, I know my dad. Like, if someone asks me that question now, I know what to say. You know, the last thing that I want to say to you, and as a kind of summary of what I've been experiencing and pushing for in my life at this moment with my family members like my dad, you choose the story. You might not choose in life what happens to you, clearly. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, we choose everything. I was sexually abused. I don't think I chose that. But things happen in life that we either direct or we are victim to. But that's not the end of the story. You choose the end of your story. You might not choose the stimulus or the action that was put upon you, but you choose how you perceive it, and you ultimately are the one that creates and defines the meaning of that experience to yourself and to the rest of the world when you talk about who you are and why it is that you are who you are. We always, 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 always have the opportunity to decide how our stories end. We might not be able to choose the beginning. The middle might be a tougher road as we figure out why things happened and figure out who we want to be in light of them. But the ending is always up to us. And the reality is that no matter what has happened over the course of my life, I'm 25 now. I'm an adult now, and I'm figuring this stuff out now. And the reality is that as somebody who gets to decide the end of her story, I have realized that I do not want a life where I look back at the end and say, I don't know my father. I didn't know my father. I don't want that regret on my heart. I want to at least try. And this is me trying to figure out who I want to be beyond my trauma, beyond my circumstances, beyond the wounds, who I become, not despite all that, but because of all that. And the aftermath of that destruction can be just a beautiful beginning to a new story if I choose to rewrite my ending. Thank you for listening. Take the power back in your own stories, whatever stories you are telling yourself about who you are and why you are who you are. I hope, regardless of what they look like, that you are choosing them consciously. And if you're not, then maybe that's where you start. I know where I would like to end. Thank you so much for being here. I love you from the bottom of my heart and my soul. And I'll see you next week. Bye.